It is now 6:10, so I'm going to move into welcoming everybody to this event this evening. It's a terrific opportunity to celebrate, but look back on something which has only just been produced. And we're going to screen for the first time the Closes and Opens movie, which has been developed and produced and filmed by AWED, edited and so on and so forth, but also features a whole bunch of characters, participants, people. And many of those people are here tonight as well. So we're lucky enough to involve them later in the Q&A. My name's Chris Speed. I work at the Futures Institute, and I'm going to host this evening's proceedings. I'm going to give you a few house notes, though. We are recording. So in recording mode, it means Zoom captures everything, and it really does capture everything. So everything you put into the chat, it will capture. However, when Lauren later gets the edit back from the cloud, it's all pushed to the cloud, she'll draw it down and she'll edit back just the video. And I'm sure she'll then share it on the EFI website and accompany to the movie. So it becomes quite important that you understand all of your material is being captured at this point in time. So please be aware of what you put in. We're going to use the chat window just for chat, as you can see. And if you have any formal questions, we've got one already, I notice. We've got Patricia asking a Florence Nightingale question. I'm not going to answer it now, but if you've got anything, please put it into the Q&A window. What else have I got? We've got some social handles, and they're behind me. So if I go to speaker view, oops, a daisy, can you highlight me? Let's see, Lauren, can you put the spotlight on me for a moment? There we go. That's the order of events tonight, but we've also critically got 3 hashtags there. So please feel free to use those. You can see we've got them now in the chat window, so feel free to use those. We've also got the movie on YouTube, and I think Sapphire is going to post that into the chat later, just in case your connection to the Zoom. We're going to stream the movie through Zoom, but if you lose contact, please use the web reference and you can catch up with us. There it goes. You can catch up with us almost in real time through the YouTube link there as well. You feel free to add comments into YouTube. It would be great. I'm sure the production team would be happy to capture them, but we won't be referencing any comments or questions tonight. I'm going to go back to gallery mode, please, Lauren. It was nice to see me, but on the other hand, it gets a bit too close. And I think that's everything I have to say. So we're now going to move and hand over to Liz. And it's been a terrific journey to help curate both tonight, but understand what you've been trying to do through this. So I'll offer some quick biographies and introduce AWED, who produced, made, and developed the movie. Let's go with Sapphire. Sapphire Goss makes experiential video landscapes for commissions, installations, exhibitions, and live events around the UK. Background in visual anthropology, artistic research encompasses interdisciplinary themes connecting place, landscape, and memory through experimental documentary forms. And you'll see all of these characteristics coming through in the way that the movie is produced. Darren Umley's research interest intersects somewhere between visual methods, design theory, and cultural geography. He's currently managing editor of the Journal of the Cultural Economy and the publication's archive editor for the Design Research Society. And you'll see particularly there's a criticality around what we mean when the team represent a space which has been produced through so many different economies, and often economies that Edinburgh perhaps doesn't always wear on its sleeve. David Motes is a sociologist based at Linköping University, researches mainly around digitization, the role of machine learning and AI in various industries, including healthcare, journalism, and politics and academia, and the interest in the methodological implications of these new sources of digital data for online platforms. So you'll see again that there's this tone as Sapphire builds up some of the textures. There is an ongoing question around what the digital is and what data is, perhaps as an archive, but ultimately in a future context. And of course, on to Liz McFall, who is the Director of Data Civics and Chancellor's Fellow at Edinburgh Futures Institute and Sociology at the University of Edinburgh. She's a sociologist of markets with a particular interest in how markets for difficult products succeed and how they fail. Her books include Markets and the Arts and Attachments, Devising Consumption, advertising, a cultural economy, and so on and so forth. But you'll see between all 4 of them, they represent a fascinating series of, well, I would say actors, wouldn't I? but producers of this piece of work. So without further ado, Liz, I'm going to hand over to you. And I think you have 4 little pieces, set pieces from each of you to preface the movie.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, we're going to give set pieces, so this is fairly scripted, what follows. I do not know what it is about you that closes and opens. Only something in me understands. We took the title of our film from the poem Somewhere I Have Never Travelled, Gladly Beyond by E. Cummings. Some of us might feel that way about Edinburgh, but that wasn't the reason we chose that poem. It was more that Edinburgh is a city of knots and layers, acute angles, dark corners, and sudden open expanses. Closes that open and open spaces that close. We wanted to think about what closes and what opens a city, and to whom. This, as we've all had recent cause to learn, can come as a sudden and dark surprise. In more regular everyday times, what closes and what opens a city, what goes public and what stays private is a routine, technical and limited negotiation. Take Edinburgh's closes, for example. There are, give or take, 66 closes, opening up onto the 5 streets that make up the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. Historically, closes were private, gated properties, often bearing the names of their owners. Some of them still are. Others, like Flesh Market Close and Warriston Close, are now public thoroughfares. Some closes have disappeared completely as streets and bridges like Victoria Street, the Mound, George IV and North Bridge were layered up and over them to connect to the new town. The best known casualty is Mary King's Close. The legend that Mary King's Close was sealed up in 1644 with 600 plague victims quarantined inside has had more of a dramatic hold on urban memory than the much duller fact that its partial closure was a planning decision taken to build the city chambers. The rest was later truncated to make way for Coburn Street. Mary King's Close has been closed and opened again, in and out of private ownership since the 17th century. Parts of it opened once more as the real Mary King's Close in 2003, a tourist attraction. This pattern repeats and varies across the old town. The closes are notorious now for lockboxes, the mark of the short-term private lets that now take up 29% of the old town's housing stock. What should be closed? What should be open? What should be public? What should be private? These problems are framed and reframed as the city projects into a data capital future. But how do you build a future for a city with such a glamorous past? Glamour in Scots was an action, a sort of a spell that afflicts the eyesight. And Edinburgh is a city that glamours. It is Walter Scott's, piled deep and massy, close and high. Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde. A city that Hugh McDermott called, in one poem, a mad god's dream, and damned in another as too stupid yet to learn how not to stand in her own light. Even the nickname Auld Reekie was a smoke signal for McDermott of the city's monstrous acquiescence to ends. Its dark undertow, or underbelly even, as the live events company that's currently at the centre of a sometimes bitter controversy about the appropriation of East Prince Street Gardens to deliver a product called Edinburgh's Christmas, is known. Edinburgh, McDermott said, needed to learn how to consume her own smoke. It still does, even if the fumes today are from a data exhaust. The film itself is rooted in the story of how Edinburgh Futures Institute was growing in the old Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh building. The original building was laid out in the Nightingale system to isolate and to close down contagion. But it also had the Latin for open to all inscribed above its main entrance. Maintaining a balance between these two nearly irreconcilable ambitions was part of the everyday working practices of the hospital. For EFI, the challenge is to turn a building designed to close down infection into an atmosphere where data fuels are contagious, democratic, and, following Patrick Geddes, civic intellect. There are worse ways to fill the gap left by the Royal Infirmary than by building a physical, architectural marker of the civic and global demand to keep a watch on all our futures.
The city is, as Marshall Berman describes modernism, a maelstrom of perpetual disintegration and renewal. Towers loom over and retract, distorting containment and scale. Engulfing shadows from the tall buildings of the city give way to incandescent bursts of sunlight, a sudden exhalation of space. Light in the city is tangible, tactile, sensual. It hammers into you or glides over you. Effervescent glimmers, fractured and bouncing off every surface, slicing into the peripheral vision as you move through the low-level sunbeams through a slatted fence. Softer, dappled as it glistens through trees. Shifting squares of sun on a wall flicker as traffic goes past. At night, iridescent reds and greens, oranges and neons warp through beaded raindrops. Light pools from lamps above or glares off the wet pavements, making molten mirrored sheets. A city wears a physical representation of what we, as a city, value at any given time. Empty Airbnb properties, luxury flats, retail experiences, new quarters made by estate agent branding, private space and spikes to clear unsightly poverty. That's already then. Now, there are new structures already. Field hospitals, pop-up morgues, bemused wildlife returning. The streets are dead while the screens glow. Sometimes Edinburgh wears its history like a theme park facade, a city dipped in aspic. No lives behind the dead-eyed windows, just holiday lets. Now these transient streams of visitors too are ghosts. What now? What next? A city's a living thing, a body with different processes and undulations, flows, shivers and sparks, tangled veins of roads, cables and pipes beneath the skin of the streets. It truncates and layers time and memories. As cities are redeveloped, buildings are collateral damage. They are lost or repurposed, sometimes leaving just a shell or a facade. A whole spatial axis knocked flat and re-expanded. Lives bellowing and contracting, a building inhaling and exhaling. Are the shadows of old rooms and corridors still there? Are buildings haunted by what they once were? We live with imprints of lives perceptible in the walls, the resonances of past lives, the clamoring presences of absence. Glass surfaces everywhere are pockets, glimpses of place, portals into other worlds, capturing in their reflection things you didn't notice before, and your own reflection looking back at you. Light flickers are like memories, shards of recognition, subtly luminous glimpses of life, one-act snapshots. So as well, we must take slices and snapshots of history, present and the future, to make sense of it, and tell stories to make sense of ourselves. We started our research with the Closes, Merry King's Close and the Old Plague. Then people lived up close with animals and very close with each other. We don't do that now, not in the developed world anyway, and not yet anyway. Some of Edinburgh's structures were built on chattel slavery, which increased after smallpox wiped out indigenous labour from the Americas, tides of history pulled by microbes. We journeyed through time, through the sanitary pavilion wards of the infirmary, through the incubation of the welfare state, through the spread of big data, and the contagious miasma of ideas online, both healthy and poisonous. We want to show the city not just as a drama in time, but as a layered choral symphony, the past emerging through watery layers, shifting, shimmering, and flickering. An original score by electronic artist Rob Shields takes a deceased man's collection of 78 RPM records as a starting point and makes these obsolete objects into a spatial collage of haunting, scratchy loops and textures. Instead of a fixed God's eye auteur view, the Renaissance perspective of everything converging in an orderly manner to a single eye or lens, a prismatic view, with stories, people, and microorganisms flowing through the fractal structures in an infinite mosaic.
Visual representations of the urban space have always been integral to the planning discourse. In 1911, Patrick Geddes, in his Civic Survey of Edinburgh, wrote about the arrangement of photographs and maps to show the progress of design and construction, yet also to bring out the reason of their arrest and breakdown, with abandonment of their unused spaces to the contemporary squalor and confusion. These town planners, with all their merits, made grave mistakes. These competitive plans show plainly that designers, clients and corporations alike assumed a practically indefinitely increasing population of well-to-do, the lawyers, country gentlemen, merchants and others, for whom the new town was designed, and forgot entirely to provide for cheaper burgher dwellings, much less for workmen's homes. Jump forward 30 years from Geddes, and benefiting from both technical advances in image making and in data gathering and processing, another Patrick, Abercrombie, in a post-war civic survey and plan for Edinburgh, wrote about the importance of past trends of human activities, whether they are economic, as in the industrial field, or whether they are social, as may be reflected in the community life of the home and its environment. In some measure, we have to be prophets in planning for the immediate and more remote future, so that it is necessary to consider past trends with those of the present being more indicative of the immediate future, while past trends, considered together with those of the present, can give a lead for the more remote future. From the mass of data obtained and illustrated in the form of maps, the planning scheme may emerge as a logical sequel, marrying what is best with the old, with what is considered best for the future. The facts may be read from those maps, and a special effort has been made to present the information in a way that is at once attractive and easy in the visual sense to comprehend. 70 years further on from that again, and the mechanics of surveying and representing the city and the methods available to engage the audience with those representations have become more immediate, more digital and more interactive. Google cars are driving along every street in the world, taking pictures of all the buildings and roadsides and other places where cars can't go. The wide availability of the street level image data that's collected, collated and curated acts as a provocation and supplication to psychogeographers, shops and shoppers, app developers, academics and artists, all now in this modified landscape of COVID-19, to be created and consumed from the comfort, if we're lucky, of our own homes. Google Street View photographs of houses are collected and annotated with their age, type and condition in ways that suggested can help insurance companies remotely assess the accident risk of the car drivers who live inside. Elsewhere, the cars parked outside the houses when the Google car drives through a city are used to infer from a distance and with no social interaction the income, race, education and voting patterns of the residents of that neighbourhood. And so it's always been the case from Geddes to Google, that the way we collect data from and about the city, the way that we visually engage with its streets and maps and plans and archives, the way that we represent the city and the data, the way that we present it on paper and on screen, provides us with various vehicles and vantage points from which to explore our landscape, to question our assumptions, to inform our research, to reflect on our past, and to project into our future.
We all, in our private lives, cultivate hopes and fears for the future, projections of achievements won and crises surmounted. But when cities, when collectives dream of the future, they do so through odd rituals in sometimes alien tongues. They speak the language of participation, civics, the greater good, of inevitable progress, and of course, stability and security. They gather around fetishized objects like maps, statistical tables, elaborate financial plans, aspirational leaflets, networked apps, and flashy data visualizations. How are our aspirations projected onto these objects, these technologies, these methods of future projection? How do these projections come to shape cities in sometimes unexpected ways? How do they authorize certain ways of thinking, not just ideas of what society should be, but also ideas of what people are like, how they relate to each other? In short, it matters what these methods can see and what they cannot. Modernization projects like Lord Minto's proposals for carrying on certain public works in the city of Edinburgh, which gave birth to the new town, did so with forceful depictions, presented a picture of the future development so complete and so compelling that it had to be built, because it was already built in people's imaginations. But this didn't happen out of thin air. The proposals had to already be embedded in networks of influence, had to understand the dreams and desires of their intended audiences. So even when the future descends on the present, seemingly from outer space in all its exact geometry, it needs to take root in an existing physical infrastructure, but also an entrenched social landscape shaped by power and inequality. These projections, then, have to reckon with all the missing masses, the servants and the slaves who are left out of their seamless elevations. Today, our future projections seem to arise from less tangible artifacts, from systems which do not present the future as a series of concrete plans and fully rendered spaces which we can inhabit. Both market-led interventions and digital app-based solutions work precisely by leaving the future open, by enshrining algorithmic rules and promising collective intelligence, adaptation, and learning. This does not mean that they are any less driven by compelling stories, tall tales spun to win over monthly active users and investors. And just like past methods of future projection, they also draw on an impoverished notion of the social, reduced to the sum of individual interests, or in the agile language of tech development, user needs and user journeys. Yet the best neural networks in the world still struggle to adapt to the local contingencies, the cobblestone streets, the routines and customs which predate them and ultimately keep them in check. During the current coronavirus crisis, I've been thinking about what images we are being presented with, what languages are being spoken. We have the vertiginous death rates of the different countries synced into the strange temporality of days since first infection, the curve looming over our meager hospital capacity, which must be flattened. The current rhetoric invokes war and thus the exceptionalism of the situation, but no mention of endpoints or end states. Notions of the common good and social insurance are whispered begrudgingly by autocrats and Ayn Rand libertarians alike. These techniques of forecasting still imagine us as agents with finite urges living on a depthless chessboard in which we interact, a world on a wire, to borrow Fassbender's title. They still think in terms of nation states and commensurable cases which necessarily erase experience and variation. They do not imagine us huddled in gnarled old cities and creaking hospitals, ancient enough to remember the Spanish flu a century ago. We need future projections which acknowledge that they are from somewhere, which are built on and do not deny what worlds came before them, which versions of the present they will have to inhabit. Techniques which can imagine different relationships beyond the individual and the state, buyer and seller, or communities in the merely tokenistic sense. Future images always have to conjure their own problems. The problem of the undeserving poor, of moral decay, of urban congestion, of inefficiency. It'll be interesting to see what kind of problem we make of the coronavirus and what kind of problem the coronavirus makes of us.